tossers have thrown it out the door with their behaviour this week. They should be ashamed of themselves. They should absolutely look at themselves in the mirror and wonder what the have they been doing. They're hissing at us and calling us cheats in the Lord's long room, and they have the gall to say, talk to us about the spirit of cricket. Absolute bullshit.
There's a big appeal, it's hit him on the pad, he's out! Lions gone, New South Wales are 9 down, onto Sydney Road, and it's hit a car! Oh, I think it's hit a car! What a way to bring up your 50!
All you want is to leave it all behind. Now there is a simple remedy to stay fit for all eternity.
Oh, it's a great day. It's the day after the Test series, and Damian Watson is back to the podcast. Yes, you're listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Menas. We're going to wrap up the Border Gavaskar series and chat about the Big Bash. But Damian, Happy New Year. How are you?
Happy New Year to you. Yeah, not too bad. It's been certainly an eventful summer, hasn't it? And we'll have a discussion as to where it ranks, I guess, in recent times or even throughout history matters, but thoroughly entertaining.
Yeah, well, let's start with that. I mean, just before we started recording, Damian was saying to me, well, I'll let you say it, but do you feel that this series is a bit overhyped, that it wasn't quite as good as everybody's saying it was?
Not overhyped. It was a very entertaining series and it had a lot of subplots to it. What I take issue with is a lot of people out there saying it was the greatest series of all time. I don't think that's the case. There were a lot of one-sided matches, probably bar the Melbourne Test, which had a lot of twists and turns, exciting finish at the end of day 5. The remainder of the series really, ostensibly, was one-sided in its own way, each Test match. I think I still rank the 05 Ashes series as the greatest I've ever seen because the matches were, bar that first Test, the matches were thoroughly in the balance for much of the series and you didn't know which way it was going to go. I don't think we had that necessarily in this Test series. So a lot of people, I think there's a bit of recency bias when they're saying it's the greatest they've ever seen.
Yeah, so I see your point, and you could make an argument that the last series here between India and Australia was even better, where obviously India won on the last day at the Gabba, and we had some seesawing contests. So I do see what you're saying, but I actually think when you step back and look at the sort of overall magnetism of this series and the fact that it drew record crowds, almost 900,000 people went to the cricket in 5 tests. It was the first 5 test series between these two nations. And there was huge interest, record TV ratings, record radio ratings. So I think maybe not like the in terms of purely on the cricket it being the best ever. I do agree with you. We've seen some absolute classics, but I do think overall this was one of the most dynamic and entertaining series. And I think it had the atmosphere in the grounds, like going to 2 of the test matches, it was humming. I mean, this series had life.
Yeah, I think in terms of hype, and I think it's a great thing for Cricket Australia going forward, isn't it, when it comes to a series against India, because you're going to get, and it's probably a little bit more time zone friendly compared to the Ashes when you get an away tour either side. So we're talking from an Indian point of view and an Australian point of view. It's not too bad, the time zone. So from a TV perspective and the amount of advertising you can draw and how much it's worth and the amount of eyeballs that are on it, I think it's great. It does bring up the debate, though, whenever it's not India and England, you're going to get that same sort of attention. No. But having said that, one thing I would say, I think the Big Bash has actually fed off the success of the international series as well. And we've seen an increase in crowds there. So it's a cyclical thing, as we know, but I think all forms of cricket have benefited from it. And now, like the Sri Lankan series that's coming up, for instance, right? I think if that had been 12 months ago, would we have had the same level of interest in it? I don't think so. But now there's actually probably a renewed sense of enthusiasm surrounding test matches, even when they're played overseas. The only thing is, it's not. Imagine if it was on free-to-air, man. There's not a lot competing with it around that time in February because we haven't got into the footy codes yet. The Australian Open's over, and it's actually in prime time. So it's a shame in a way it's not on free-to-air, but that's another point. But my point is, it's I think all forms of cricket within Australia are feeding off the success of the Test series and the hype surrounding it.
Oh, absolutely. Cricket's in a great spot at the moment. It's, bouncing back. I mean, they talked about on Boxing Day having record TV ratings for the Test and then into the Big Bash game. So you spot on there. Yeah. So I think, in terms of all-time series, it's sort of up there, and it's hard to separate the Australian India series and the Ashes now. I think the Ashes, is just above the Border Gavaskar Trophy, but not by much anymore. I mean, going into this summer, I thought there was a bigger gap, but the way the Australian public responded to the series and turned out, and I think it just shows that Australians yearn for competitive cricket. When England come here, they are not competitive or haven't been for 15 years. Whereas India, the last two times they were here, won, and, was so entertaining that I think people just wanted to get out there and see them. So, just a captivating series.
I think it's more the byplay, though, as well. I mean, you could argue if the rain wasn't around in Brisbane, it still would have been a 4-1 scoreline, arguably, in Australia's favour. I think it's more the byplay surrounding maybe a bit of a rivalry between the two sides, the Constas effect as well, the battle between he and the Indian side, also the fractures within the Indian cricket team as well. I think all of those things do add up with a bit of hype surrounding the Test series as well, and I think that contributed to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you just move your mic down a little bit, just because it's getting a bit of yeah, that'll be better. Getting a bit of noise into it. Yeah, so Australia win the series 3-1. They have qualified for the World Test Championship final. They hold every major bilateral trophy. They hold the World Test Championship. They hold the 50-over World Cup. So it's quite a stunning array of trophies that the Aussies have held. So it's hard to criticize this team. It's the first time they've held this trophy since 2017. So kudos to them. It's not quite a full checklist for this Australian side. They've never won in England, they've never won in India, but they're pretty bloody good.
Oh, no doubt about that. And look, I think we cast a few aspersions, didn't we, as to whether we were going to fall off a cliff. Well, that's probably not the case anymore. I still have issues regarding whether there is that regeneration and the depth of regeneration that we want. Having said that, you look at Boland coming in, you could argue he probably deserves a consistent place in that starting 11 now. We know how good he is, particularly on Australian soil as well, but I'm still not sold on Constas regardless of what he produced on Boxing Day. I thought it was great entertainment, but at the same time, is that going to stand up in the heat of the Test arena going forward once he gets worked out? I'm not sure. But we probably have underestimated the Australian team to an extent. Also, there was that whole go woke, go broke narrative that was going on a couple of years ago. Well, at the end of the day, they're getting record crowds, record TV ratings, and they're winning. So it was, I think we were a bit harsh, I think, generally as a media and as a public as well on the Australian cricket team.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just move that mic up above because I'm getting a bit of breathing into it. It's getting a bit of distortion. Yeah, I was never into the go woke or go broke narrative. My issues with Cummins have nothing to do with that stuff. They never have been and they never will be, because Cummins is not a preachy person. He will never go out of his way to try and force his opinions on anyone. I have, great amount of respect the way he carries himself. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we were quite critical of the team about to fall off a cliff. And, I still think, the danger is the Ashes next year. So let's see though. But I think the regeneration begun this summer. 3 debutants. They uncovered Bo Webster, who seems to be able to contribute at Test level in all facets of the game. Constas certainly showed something. Like, he'll be a force at Test cricket, whether it's now or in the coming years. And McSweeney, I do think, showed enough where he could be an effective middle order player. So, look, the regeneration has begun. Has it gone far enough? I'm not sure quite yet. We still need some holes to be filled. I mean, Kawaja leaves the series under a cloud. Marnus Labuschagne finished this series under a cloud. So, it's not quite the full picture, but I have to commend the selectors. They made some tough decisions, and dropping Mitch Marsh, they didn't want to do, but they knew they had to, and they did bring in 2 openers throughout the summer. So they've started the process.
Yeah, that's true. I still thought they were a little bit harsh on McSweeney personally, because at the end of the day, that top order role wasn't necessarily something he was accustomed to. You're right, he might be a future middle order player, and I still think he'll get another chance going forward. I still think, though, you mentioned Bo Webster, he's still around that 31 years of age mark, and I'm very glad to see he's got his chance, and I think that gives a bit of hope to a lot of Sheffield Shield cricketers out there, and he made an impact straight away. Great all-rounder, very versatile, he can do everything basically, and he's a tall man as well. But aside from Constas, and I guess to a lesser extent McSweeney, do we have that younger core group? I'm not sure, but having said that, we do have a tendency in Australia to, I guess, throw people into the side when they're a little bit older than that 19 to 25 bracket, don't we, compared to other nations?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we'll see over the next couple of seasons who they replace, people, which positions they replace. But, let's look at some of the issues that came out of the end of the Sydney Test match. So when I was at the SCG yesterday, they were giving out the Border Gavaskar trophy. Alan Border was on the stage to give it, but Sonny Gavaskar wasn't there. And I found that very strange because I'd seen Sonny all around the press box the whole Test match. And so I sort of thought, well, if you had Border and Gavaskar there, they should both present the trophy. And I tweeted out something saying I thought that was disappointing. And it's been pointed out to me that this was kind of discussed before the series, and there might be a little bit of politics between, the BCCI and Australia, and way presentations have been done in the past. But I still think it's disappointing. I think as Australia, we don't want to get caught up in those little dramas. If you have a legend of the game there, Sunil Gavaskar, and his name is on the trophy and he's willing to present it with Alan Border, then I think that's so appropriate and so respectful. It adds to the luster of the win as well. And just surprised because Cricket Australia have got a lot right in the last couple of years. I just found that one was a little wrong.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I was a little bit surprised as well. As you said, maybe it was a preordained thing that it would depend on which side actually won the series. And obviously with Australia winning, AB was brought up there on his own. But if they're both there, I think it's a good touch if you have the both of them presenting it. I agree with you. I was a little bit surprised, and it sounds like Sonny was a bit surprised as well.
Yeah, so that was disappointing. There has been some backlash towards the SCG pitch. Kawaja called it a stinker on ABC radio, and there's been other rumours that the Australian team really not happy with it. What do you think as a neutral?
Yeah, to a degree, I would probably agree with those sentiments. Having said that, I think there's room for improvement which can be achieved. We saw the MCG, that was a bloody road, wasn't it, about 7 years ago, wasn't it, Metters? And I thought the pitch was fantastic for the Boxing Day test, so I think they could easily fix it. At the end of the day, there was no rain in Sydney, so people have things to complain about, don't they? They always complain about something, so we actually had good weather in Sydney for once this time round. Yeah,
we got a result.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, would you have wanted it to be a road? There probably wasn't a lot in it for the batsmen. I would agree with that. So I can see Usman's point of view. But I'd rather a contest which we had this time round where it was somewhat low scoring, but somewhat entertaining as well. I know it ended up being one-sided, but I don't know. I'd rather that than an absolute road, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that I agree with that sentiment, but I just... I also agree with Kawaja that it wasn't a very good wicket. It was too far the other way from being a road. It was just too much uneven bounce, too much grass on it. And in the end, we got a very short test match. So, disappointing. The SCG really needs to work it out. It's one of the premier cricket venues in the country. And for the pitch to be, that unpredictable was disappointing.
What about the SCG and its standing now, Metters? Look, they've done some redevelopments on it. I still think it's a great ground. Some people still rank it as number one in Australia, but the MCG, when it's full like that, and with Adelaide Oval as well, and the praise that it's received for this series, where do you think the SCG stands as a New South Welshman now?
Well, it's my personal favourite, but I think that, the other grounds bring different things. Obviously, we've got Perth Stadium, which is, a great new modern stadium. Adelaide, like Sydney, has a rich history. It still, looks beautiful and has retained much of its traditional feeling. But the MCG, what we saw this series was something to behold. The fact that they could get 370,000 people there in 5 days. There's no other ground in the world that could do that. Melbourne is such a sports loving town. It has such a huge stadium that really was a compelling event. So yeah, they all offer different things. I still think Sydney, with those beautiful Victorian stands, has something unique that other grounds don't have. So yeah, they'll bring something different, I think.
Just on the interest and the attendances, a lot of it, we must mention, does come down to the rise of the Indian population as well, the rise of the middle class Indian population in particular. You've got to remember, India last year overtook, or the year before actually, overtook China as the biggest population in the world. So, and that's where cricket can get a bit exciting, because you do wonder how far, if that migration reach extends out right around the world, how far we can go with it. And I think Australia's been one of the best to embrace that element. I'd still love it if we have an India v Pakistan test match at the MCG, because you get the numbers, I reckon, at least for the first few days.
Oh, yeah, it'll be absolutely packed out. People would fly from all around the world to see it. Just on you saying that the SCG was kind of one-sided, I don't think it was one-sided at all. I think that, had Bumrah been fit on that last day, then Australia would have had a really tough time chasing down 162. They might have done it, but I think it would have been a lot tighter than it was. I mean, it was, India losing their premier quick sort of a day and a bit into the game really curtailed them. So, yeah, I think that was so lucky for the Australians. Even Khawaja said that, Cummins said that not having to face Bumrah was, such a relief.
But doesn't that speak to the difference in depth with the bowling stocks?
Oh, yeah.
Without Bumrah, it would have been an even, who knows what the scoreline would have been at the end of the series. I mean, even in that Perth test, Metters, India were bowled out for 150 odd, weren't they, in the first innings? And Bumrah dominated. I know they had their contributors with the bat, but at the same time, without Bumrah, would it have been an even more one-sided scoreline coming into the series?
Yeah, of course. But yeah, you're right. Australia had Scott Boland to call on. We were quite critical after the first test match about the preparation for the first test by the Australians. And it's interesting, there's different takes by the Australian players. Mitchell Starc was asked about the preparation before the first test. And again, he deferred to individuals, so sort of saying, every individual had different preparation and he was happy with his. So, I think there is some mild division within the Aussie camp about, some players not playing any Shield cricket before the series, some players playing Shield cricket. They're too smart to call anyone out. But it was pointed that Starc didn't say, no, I thought the whole team was prepared. He just said he sort of left it up to individuals who had different preparations. So that was interesting. And, I really am curious. People are really criticizing me for this take about the preparation. And as you say about Bumrah, I think had Australia started the ground running in Perth and been fully switched on and ready to go, this series could have been over a long time ago. Might have been, 2-0 after 2, and then, Australia could have coasted. But I'm really curious. Like, Cummins is never going to admit he was wrong, but I'm curious how he approaches the Ashes next summer. So we won't get Cummins going, oh, yeah, I need we'll just see Cummins maybe play a bit more cricket in the lead up to the Ashes if he feels like he got it wrong. So that's what I'll be looking at. Does Cummins go, I'm going to play a Shield game before the Ashes?
But perhaps we'll see, because it's one of those things, just having a think about the fixture to come. And does that play a part in a way as well, Menas? If you have a pretty demanding fixture during the cricketing off season, shall we say, from an Australian point of view, does that impact? I mean, in the lead up, we had a World Cup in the shorter format of the game, in the T20, and we had a one-day series, which I know a lot of players missed anyway. But, we had that one-day series in England. There was some build-up there where the players did have to do a lot of travelling. Does that play a part as well? Plus, there's all the domestic competitions around the world with the IPL. So I could sort of understand them wanting to have a little bit of a break. You're right, from a pure cricketing point of view, I reckon it'd be great if they played a bit more Shield cricket, more than just some of them only played the one game, some none. So I see your point, but they need a break at some point.
I'm happy if Hazelwood and Stark, I think they just played one Shield game each. They just wanted some red ball bowling. They wanted, get some overs in the legs. And, maybe that's what Cummins should do. Just play one. You don't have to play 5 Shield games. Just one before, a couple of weeks out before the first test. Because there's no doubt Cummins, as he got into the match in Perth, his bowling got better and better. And people can criticize me. There's so many more qualified experts than me. They're saying the same things, that it was evident that Cummins was just short of being ready for that first test. So look, in the end, we got the job done. He was fit and firing right at the end there. But, if Bumrah had been fit, maybe India could have snatched a draw, and we would have rued not being, really cherry ripe for that first test. And just, that's what Australian cricket teams used to do. When teams get here, you just punch them straight up. Don't let them settle. Don't let them get into the series. You come at them hard in the first 2 test matches and you try and knock them out. The issue with Cummins is, because he's skipper, he wants to try and be fit for every test match. Whereas in the past, you would just unleash your fast bowlers, and if by the 3rd or 4th test, one of them needs a spell, then that's what you do. But that's not quite the way they're quite approaching it. Next topic. So I don't know if you saw the Virat Kohli sandpaper sledge. Yes. Basically, he's acting out of, when Smith got out of, no sandpaper in the pockets. The only thing I will say, there were reports that the ICC were investigating India for having something that they couldn't identify being filmed on camera when they were in the field. So I wonder if Kohli was giving it to Smith, or he was just giving it to everybody.
Probably just frustrated he was giving it to the crowd, wasn't he? As well as, there was the situation itself. Whether I think it's in bad taste, I don't know. At the end of the day, it's byplay, isn't it? And it's what happened. At the end of the day, the Aussies committed the sin. So I think when you commit the sin, I know a lot of water's gone under the bridge since. You got to cop a little bit, don't you? You can't really be too deterred by it. It's just, I think it's byplay for the crowd. I think it probably helps the series a little bit in that way, to have that bit of a rivalry.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think anyway. I'm not offended.
I like the theatre of it. And your sport needs a villain. I think it was too much him going up and shoulder charging Constance at the MCG.
Yeah.
And you can make a case that it was a little bit in poor taste what he did with the sandpaper. But, yeah, I don't mind the theatre of it. I don't mind the villain. Are some of the crowd going to think he's a dickhead afterwards? Absolutely. But who cares?
We complain, don't we, that players don't show enough personality now. And this is the thing with Constance too, Betters, and this has been talked about in other sporting codes as well. For a long time, we've had a lot of robotic sports people who just, and that's fine. They have I'm probably of a similar personality where you're straight down the line, cookie cutter type personalities, and a lot of the larrikinism has gone out of the game. And now Sam Constas and Kohli, to a degree, has played his part in this as well. They show a bit of personality, a bit of gamesmanship. There's probably a bit of an edge to it as well. With they're in the heat of battle. They say things, they do things that they wouldn't probably do under their normal temperament. But we, as a media, I don't understand the media complaining about that sort of thing when it adds to the hype of the series, and then they complain about some of the conduct. I know there's probably an element of poor taste about it, and I know cricket's a little bit different to other sports, but you got to have that bit of theatre, I think. I think the Gen Z, one of the things I like about the whole Gen Z personality is we're seeing a bit more showmanship and a bit more personality, which in the last 10 years, I think has been lacking in sport in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it was a good bit of fun. I'm sure Smith can take it on the chin. So just some outstanding issues from the series. Usman Khawaja, 5 test matches, 184 runs, averaged 20 for the series. I don't think there's a way you can justify keep picking him. I think he's got to go. And in the last, since the middle of last year, so this is a long run. Since the middle of, in his last 15 tests, he's averaging under 30. So this is not a small sample size. This is, a long period of sustained underperformance. He only scored 1 half century all summer. And, I do get people saying, they should take him to Sri Lanka because he plays spin well. Well, you could take him to Sri Lanka. But also you could see this as an opportunity to blood some young players, considering we've wrapped up the World Test Championship. So it actually doesn't really matter what happens there. And just being on just sheer shrewdness, if you're going into that World Test Championship final against South Africa at Lords, I'm not confident a 38-year-old Usman Khawaja will be able to keep out those South African quick bowlers. That unlike India, South Africa have really good bowlers at both ends, and they will, I think, just tear through Usman Khawaja. So you could even be pragmatic and think, okay, let's pick one of our openers who has a lot of experience playing at Lords and in England. You could look at their records. Maybe Cameron Bancroft, Marcus Harris, all these guys have played a ton of cricket at county level. You could look at who's done well at Lords and pick an opener for Lords who's actually in form and not over the hill.
But are they informed, Bancroft and Harris? I would argue
no. I was just using his examples. I'm saying there's a lot of our cricketers that play county cricket. You could look at an opener who has done well at Lords. And, Bancroft's injured at the moment, poor bugger. But I'm talking about in June. So, there will have been more county cricket played by then. So just on sheer shrewdness, I just don't think Khawaja will help us win a World Test Championship final.
I agree in that his position needs to be looked at. I just don't know who's necessarily banging down the door. That's the only thing. I think once you get someone that's standing up, and maybe you look at the county championship to a degree, I just don't necessarily see who's really banging down the door to get that spot. That's all.
But we saw with Webster, we saw with Constas. Like if you pluck informed players from domestic cricket, they could do well. And there are options, and so I think Australia's got to be bold. You just shouldn't stick with someone just because they're the incumbent. The other player is Marnus Labuschagne. So he scored 232 runs for the summer, averaged 25, but he was able to make 3 half centuries. So, he was able to contribute some crucial knocks at vital times. But there is a fair bit of pressure on him, I feel now. Like there's a certain section of the Australian public and media that's really pointing out that for the last 2 seasons, Marnus has not been the Marnus before that. And going into a big Ashes series, his form is a concern. I personally think he is worth persisting with because he is, only 30. He's shown a lot at test level. So unlike Khawaja, who's done, I think Marnus could actually turn the corner. And, those 270s in Melbourne showed something. To me, he's just holding on. And you mentioned openers. I actually wouldn't have a problem if they say to Marnus, we want you to open. Because he bats like an opener. Players have done it, Boone and Langer. You could put Marnus and Constas up the top. You could put Smith back to 3. You could then, you've got Green coming back. You've got Webster. You've got Head. So that's an option for me. And Marnus loves to leave the ball outside off stump, which is a good trade as an opener. And it might just solve a problem. Even if he doesn't want to do it, just say to him, mate, you have to do it for the team.
Yeah, potentially. I think that'd be the other thing you do when you move the jigsaw puzzles around to a certain degree. That's the only thing I can think of if you don't have anyone necessarily banging down the door. I'm thinking, I know I was probably maybe a little bit harsh on Marcus Harris there. Do you give him one more go? I mean, it might depend on what happens at county level, for instance, but, you know, he didn't show enough to me during the Shield season, but there were glimpses there. He scored that century against Tasmania, albeit Junction Oval tends to be favouring the batters, doesn't it? And he was okay in that game against India A, where he scored. Who knows what would have happened? I think he scored about 70 odd, and then if you got to that 25 or more runs, made the three figures, maybe he would have been playing in the first test in that series just past. So maybe you give him one more go. Yeah, that's the other thing. You mentioned a good alternative there, but that was the other aspect that I was thinking of as well. Do you give Harris one more go?
Other issues, probably they should be really cautious about playing Mitchell Starc in all 5 tests next summer. He clearly was gassed by this 5th test. We've shown now that Scott Boland is cherry ripe for test levels. So if Australia is fortunate enough next summer to have Cummins, Starc, Hazelwood and Boland fit, then you can see a world in which Hazelwood, Starc and Boland rotate around the 5 tests to keep them all fresh, because Starc wasn't right for that last test. He battled through it and is a warrior and he wants to play. But I think you've got to make a tough call that, especially at his age now, he needs to be managed a bit more carefully. So that's one small lesson I would learn.
And I think you put Boland on every MCG test till he can't do it anymore.
And at the SCG after his 10
well, that's the thing. The MCG and SCG conditions suit him, don't they? I'm not sure if the Perth conditions necessarily suit him, but yeah, maybe you have that rotation where he comes in for the last 2 test matches of the series.
Travis Head was the leading run scorer for Australia, 448 runs. Steve Smith, the second leading run scorer, 314 runs. Still locked on 9,999 runs. Heartbreaking stuff. And then, after that, you've got Labuschagne, Carey, and then it sort of falls away. Pat Cummins, 159 runs for the series. Good stuff for him, batting down the order. So, yeah, I think one thing is, Smith's back. Head cemented his reputation as a match winner when he's in form. And for Australia leading bowlers, well, Pat Cummins took 25 wickets at 21.36 and Scott Boland 21 wickets at 13.19. The only just behind Hazelwood, who took 6 wickets at 13.16. Starc took 18 wickets, started to fall away at the end. So look, a tremendous all-round performance by Pat Cummins. He did carry the team on his back after that poor start, and Australia was able to bounce back from 1-0 down. I think it's the first time they've bounced back from 1-0 down since 1997 in any series when they were in England. So, quite astonishing stuff. And yeah, I think Boland's probably, for Australia, just 21 wickets at 13.19 in 3 tests. That's something else.
And he's a lovable character as well. He's not really that flamboyant either. He's one of those players, I think, unlike a Lily type who puts that intimidation factor in. He's got that composure about him. It's almost a bit of a, what do you call it? A bit of a paradox in a way. He's a very composed player who can really be damaging and is so consistent with his line and length, and he can change things up when required. Those in swingers, those out swingers, you just never know what he's going to produce. So yeah, to me, he's one of the stories of the series. And yeah, I think ultimately you mentioned Pat Cummins. Whenever they're in trouble, the Aussies, he manages to dig them out. He changes the course of momentum. You got to give him credit. I know he's probably not the most likable Test captain for whatever reason, but gee, he has dug Australia out that many times. He is worthy of that position.
Yeah, he does it his way. And although I have, some criticisms about the way he goes about it, you can't argue with the results. I'm still disappointed we didn't finish the Poms off last year. We didn't do well in India, but he's somehow dragged his team over. I do think the alternative scenario yesterday, though, if Bumrah plays and Australia gets rolled, would have been an unbelievable anticlimax after Boxing Day, because that was such a heroic victory by Australia in the last session. Had India leveled the series on a shit pitch at the SCG, it would have been a huge downer. So I'm glad that didn't happen, because this team, they are a team to be proud of. They've taken all before them. They get a chance now to defend their World Test Championship final. And I guess, how much do you think of this team's legacy rests on the World Test Championship final? Let me preface this by saying, so Australia, they took this photo at the SCG yesterday, the team, and they've got the World Test Championship mace, 50 over World Cup, the Ashes. They had all their trophies with them. So it was a bit of a humble brag, I just sort of wonder is that the high point? Because you can only go one way from there. If you've got all the trophies, you're going to start losing them. Will that picture be the high point, or do they go on and defend their World Test Championship title against South Africa? And is this carries the momentum into another cycle? I don't know.
I think it can. In terms of the high point, though, it's an interesting question you raise. I think it carries a bit more weight when you win a series at home, because it's when cricket becomes a centrepiece of the sporting landscape here. I don't think, and we saw this, it got a lot of attention in 2023 when we won it then, but I don't think, it was sort of like an entree to the Ashes series, wasn't it, in 2023, that World Test Championship final. And also, have they done a deal yet with the TV? Because I think Amazon have the rights. They can on-sell it to a free-to-air network. But I do wonder, if it's just on Amazon, does it get the same credence during the middle of the footy season and get the same appreciation than the climax to this Test series?
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think it's hard to tell, because I was really into the World Test Championship final. But I think it was quite a big moment for Australia when we won that. We weren't tipped to beat India in that final, and we were able to do it. So, yeah, I think it is a momentous moment, and I think it will get some interest. But you're right. If it's not on free-to-air TV, the last one was. So that was, a big difference. You're spot on. So, yes, hopefully Amazon on-sell it. If not, we'll just have to promote the hell out of it on this so people watch it.
Exactly.
So what's next for the Australian side? They go to Sri Lanka for a test tour. Peter Handscomb is tipped to tour. Matt Kuhneman is tipped to tour. So is Todd Murphy. Joe Richardson is in the frame. So we could get a different looking Australian team. Perhaps Travis Head. They actually spoke about Travis Head opening on the subcontinent. So we could have, Head going to the top of the order, and whether that means Constance or Khawaja misses out. And then you bring Handscomb into the middle order, and then you use Bo Webster to open the bowling with, say, Mitchell Stark, and then you just have three spinners, because Gould, where they're playing both tests, is so spin friendly. Australia might go in with Lyon, Kuhneman, and Murphy, for example.
Yeah, I think it's good, though, and I think you have the luxury now because of the fact that the World Test Championship final spot is sewn up, that you can trial a lot of these players who are suited to the conditions in Sri Lanka. I think there's still a point to prove, though, because we haven't been overly successful over there at test level. You think back to 2016 minutes where we got absolutely rolled, a clean sweep over there. I think there's still a point to prove, isn't it, that as Australia we can perform well on those wickets. And I think if you're going to really be a powerhouse, you're going to have to perform in different conditions. So, and that's something that the current team, that's the one thing the current team hasn't really perfected yet, has it? And the
absolutely. They won in Pakistan on absolutely flat tracks. So that's a good point. And Steve Smith will be the captain. He loves captaining the side in the subcontinent. So, and I guess, as I said, maybe you see this as a building blocks. Australia will be going to India in a couple of years to try and win over there again. So this is sort of the first step in, upskilling, getting some.
Correct.
That's why I think, Constance should play. Why play Khawaja? People say they know he's good at spin. Well, we've signed up the Test Championship. Let Constas play. Let him and Head open. And
Fair enough. I agree.
anyway, so that's what's next for Australia. They head to Sri Lanka. I think the first test starts on the 29th of January, so not long to go.
Just on that, it's one of those just fixturing things, but it happens to clash with the women's Ashes test. Do you reckon they take away from each other because it's exactly the same time as well? Because the women's Ashes test is a day-nighter.
Yeah, it's not ideal, but unfortunately, I don't think Australia can do anything about it because the Champions Trophy is right after it.
Yeah.
And that is the Ashes test is the final match of that series. So I guess a bit will depend on how live the Ashes are. I was talking to Elisa Healy about it actually during the SCG test, and she was saying, we were saying because I think it's good that basically for a lot of the Ashes, especially the two series, the limited overs stuff, there's no men's international cricket. So it allows actual proper coverage of the Ashes series. So I'll be going, the first game this Sunday at North Sydney Oval, a 50 over game. So I'll be going to that. And then there's a 20 over game at the SCG a week later. So I can't wait for the series. I think it's going to be captivating. Two really good teams. And yeah, we'll see. I think it'll generate a bit of interest for sure. But hard to tell how much at the moment because it got huge crowds in England when they played last year.
It did. It'll be interesting to see what happens. At least they have the euphoria of the men's test series to go off. The only thing is it does still clash with the Big Bash, and it does clash at least the limited over stuff with the Australian Open. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, let's get into the Big Bash. Beautiful segue. It's good having a pro like Damian on because I want to talk about the Big Bash. Haven't been able to talk about it too much because the Australia-India series has sucked all the oxygen basically out of me. Just nothing left. No air left to get into the Big Bash. But as it stands, so we're recording this on Monday, the 6th of January. Sydney Sixers are on top of the table with 9 points. Sydney Thunder second with 8 points. Hurricanes third with 8 points. And Perth Scorchers fourth with 6 points. Then you've got the Heat, Renegades, Strikers, and Melbourne Stars. Great to see two Sydney sides at the top. Maybe we'll get an all Sydney grand final. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Warner, taking on the Magenta. But I want to ask you, Damien, it was very disappointing the way Melbourne started this series. I mean, Melbourne Stars were none from 5. The Renegades looked okay and then have fallen off badly. They've only won 2 games. It's bad for the competition for both Melbourne clubs to be so poor.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I do go back to the administration of it as well. I mean, maybe it's a coincidental thing, Manners, but remember the two sides competed in the Big Bash final at Marvel Stadium going back about, 6 years ago now, 6-7 years ago. Yeah. And that was around the time the administration of those two sides was taken over by Cricket Victoria, and it wasn't privately done. So I do, look, maybe there's a number of other things. I know Cricket Victoria have had their financial, not issues, but they've had to do some restructuring, haven't they? And I do wonder whether that's had an effect. Those resource issues have had an effect, and to a lesser extent, a bit of instability as well, have had an effect on the way the Stars and the Renegades have played, or whether it's just a coincidence.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of talk around how two teams make it really difficult for a state system. Melbourne and Sydney and Melbourne having the two-team system makes it a lot harder for them. And
bigger population, though, Minute.
Oh yeah, I disagree. I think they both should be able to put out two good teams, and I think the Melbourne Stars. I don't know well enough to know what the culture's like and stuff, but they just years of underperforming. Same with the Renegades. I think it's more than just funding. I think whether it's a chemistry thing, whether but it is bad for the comp to have the Stars none for 5, because if you're thinking of going to a game in Melbourne, thinking, oh, do I really want to see that lot play? But obviously different story in the WBBL when the Renegades won, so it's not all bad. Now, there was a couple of things I want to talk about with the Big Bash. There was a terrible collision the other night by Cameron Bancroft and Daniel Sams over at Perth Stadium. Bancroft has a broken nose and a broken shoulder. Daniel Sams, I think, has quite severe concussion. He'll be out for 12 days. I don't know if you saw the footage, but it was just a horrific scene. Really did remind me of the time when Jason Gillespie and Steve Waugh ran into each other in Kandy, I think, in Sri Lanka. But just a very distressing scene. And very distressing. But so I really like the Big Bash, Damian, but it's clear to me that it's found a space, and that space is it's a good domestic T20 comp. They have some overseas players. They're not the biggest stars in the world. They have some, good journeyman T20 cricketers. They have a few Poms out here who want to come to Australia to get a bit of sun and surf over the winter and get away from, the UK in winter. So, but it's not the most star-studded T20 league in the world because it just isn't competitive enough. To be able to pay, the best players now to compete, not just with the IPL, but with the Saudi Arabian League and the PSL. I mean, there's so many other leagues now that have just got tons of cash, way more than the BBL does. So I still think it's a good standard and the games have been very close. But I think the clearest indication of the lack of depth is the news I'm about to give you. Dan Christian, who retired as a Sydney Sixer 2 years ago, is making a comeback for the Sydney Thunder tonight because the Thunder have lost a lot of players to injury. So Bancroft and Sam's obviously out. They've also got Tanvi Sanger and Jason Sanger out. They've got Sam Constance unavailable. So that to me shows how weak or how little there is under the surface if they are going to a player that's been retired 2 years to come back and play. And Dan's no doubt playing in Legends leagues are probably not bad, but there's just not a lot there. Like underneath the Big Bash now, you've just got grade cricketers kind of who'll come in and fill a role.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if you present it in a decent way, though, the crowds will still come. And if you market it in a decent way, the crowds will still come. That's probably the main factor. And the TV ratings have been pretty good as well, at least to my knowledge.
It's fun to watch.
Yeah.
It's fun to watch.
But you're right. Like, I don't know if it'll ever get to. Are we going to acquire enough money realistically to ever match the IPL or the Saudis? I don't think so.
Well, we'll never match those. But
no.
If they were to privatise,
we're not going to get the best of the best.
No, but if they were to privatise, then potentially you would be a lot more competitive with them, and maybe it wouldn't just be.
We've seen that with the Victorian teams as well. I think there's always a risk to privatising because, if the wells run out of money, it's a little bit difficult. But you've still got the body to stand on, don't you? If that was ever the case, that they would prop them up. So, yeah, I reckon we should consider it anyway. The general privatisation of the league. There's people who love their cricket who have a lot of money and deep pockets.
Yeah, and look, I do love the BBL for what it is, in that it is good fun to watch. For me, as a big fan of domestic cricket, I still like to see all the players competing. Good friend of the show, Alex Ross, was smashing them for the Strikers last night. So, I really enjoy it. But it just really made me, when they called up Dan Christian, it made me realise it's just very thin. Last thing on the Big Bash. Over the winter, the Australian selectors picked Cooper Connolly. And, he hadn't done a lot at domestic level. There were some comments about him, getting quite a quick call up. Well, Cooper Connolly is the leading run scorer in the Big Bash right now. And this is why you do pick a player like Cooper Connolly and take them on an Aussie tour to the UK, because it helps them take their game to the next level. And then when they go back and playing something like the Big Bash, they can dominate like this. So, when you pick him in the Australian side, which I think Cooper Connolly's a player to really watch out for, they've got some, they've really developed as a player. Like, it was a good selection to take him to England.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I think that's one aspect that I do enjoy about the tournament itself, is that ultimately you can develop these players and you give them a forum to play the way they do. We saw it with Travis Head, didn't we, about close to 10 years ago. So I think there is potential there. I've liked the way he's gone about it. He's been very, very entertaining. So yeah, I think there's a lot of scope there. Is there anyone else that stood out to you from a young player's point of view
in the Big Bash?
Yeah.
Just good to see Lloyd Pope taking wickets. I think he's the equal leading wicket taker at the moment. And that's good for Australian cricket because Adam Zampa has been so good for Australia bowling that quick leg spin. Lloyd Pope is actually looking like a bit of a natural successor now. So, yeah, he's the one that jumped out to me and got a bit of a soft spot for the Pope.
Yes.
What about you?
He's someone who could have a bit of a cult following, I reckon. No, I had him in mind as well. The record speaks for itself. Do you think he'll ever go to the next level internationally?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a good chance in white ball cricket for sure. That will be where they try him out. And yeah, as I said, think of him as like an Adam Zampa.
Yeah, exactly right. Now, looking forward to the ending of the series. Well, the competition as well over the coming weeks, and be interesting to see as we head towards the back end. There's always that comparison with the Australian Open.
Yeah, you love that. I couldn't give a shit about it. With the winners from here, though, I think the Sixers and the Thunder look really good, and I also like the Hurricanes. They're due. The Hurricanes are due. They have some great players. Matty Wade's on fire. Mitchell Owen has been batting at the top of the order, and I commentated on Mitchell Owen scoring some runs for Tassie at the SCG in a Shield game last summer, and he looked really good, and he's starting to show that at BBL level. Then you've got Tim David on fire. So, Sixers, Thunder, and Hurricanes are looking like the team to beat, and the Scorchers and the Heat are sort of just behind them. But yeah, I think it's going to be two of those top three teams, Sixers, Thunder, or Hurricanes, that win the title and play in the final. What about you?
Agreed. I think the Thunder are the tip, but you're right about the Hurricanes. And I think with a lot of those Tassie cricketers in particular, I know they probably haven't been as successful this summer, but they were pretty good at Shield level despite having a lot of injuries and with the quick way in which they made runs when required. And this is in the longer format of the game. I think there is a bit of potential there in Tassie, considering the limited population they have. So I think they've done reasonably well in recent years.
Yeah, definitely.
Particularly with the bat.
That's it. Well, Damian, that's all I've got for you. Thanks for joining me back on the show. First show together of 2025. Can you believe it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much. Good to be with you.
All right. Thanks very much for joining us on Cricket Unfiltered. And we'll be back now to sort of regular weekly shows and a lot more content coming. So thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Good on you.